Months? Weeks? The American retreat to Ticonderoga in the spring and summer of 1776 had put 100 miles between them and the pursuing redcoats. But for how long? Between July and October, the two armies raced towards an encounter. The Continentals defending the northern colonies, and the British seeking to break them and end the rebellion. The campaign of 1776 was set, and the stakes were high. At Ticonderoga, Major General Horatio Gates oversaw the Continental Army's preparations against the expected British onslaught. Miles of fortifications had to be dug, cannon needed to be mounted, and new structures built for storehouses, magazines, and lodging. Tradesmen in the ranks were detailed to serve as artificers, while others were pulled off to serve with the artillery, or as desperately needed sailors. Each day, fatigue details were ordered to have eaten their breakfast by 6 a.m. before going to work, and continuing until noon. They had an hour for dinner and then back to work until 7 o'clock at night. This pace increased by mid-October, with the Army working in shifts to complete their fortifications and maximize their limited tools. The understaffed physicians, surgeons, and nurses at the hospital at Fort George struggled to prevent the spread of smallpox and other ailments that still plagued the Army and ease the suffering of patients with their limited facilities. Doctors pleaded with civilians as far as Albany for supplies to eke out their limited medicine chests. At the same time, officers labored to instill discipline, upbraiding soldiers for crimes as varied as robbing the local inhabitants to the unauthorized sale of alcohol. They had to teach the soldiers how to cook and remind them not to fire off their weapons indiscriminately in camp. And disciplinary concerns and recrimination led to courts-martial at every level of the Army, from Brigadier General Benedict Arnold all the way down to subalterns tried for disobedience, cowardice, and intoxication. Some were even cashiered and dismissed from the Army. Friction grew between common soldiers as well. Southern troops from Pennsylvania were appalled by the lack of military deportment they found amongst the New Englanders. General Schuyler had feared such regional rivalries, but the worst was avoided by physically separating the New Englanders on Mount Independence from the Pennsylvanians at Ticonderoga on the other side of Lake Champlain. To secure the waterway, specialized workers were needed to construct a credible fleet, something that had been determined at the Council of War in July. But skilled shipwrights were in short supply. Specialists from Massachusetts all the way to Pennsylvania had to be lured northward by the promise of higher wages. They labored at Skenesboro to construct fighting ships, all while battling the unhealthy conditions of the southern lake. Towards the end of August, however, a credible American fleet was on the lake, sailing northward to cruise towards the Canadian border. But as many as 6 vessels were completed only later, joining the fleet after they were finished, massed, rigged, and armed at Ticonderoga. The British, too, were preparing. They had been massively reinforced by British regulars and German auxiliaries, swelling the number of troops available to Governor Guy Carleton to over 9,000 men. Their challenge was to get enough vessels to transport them across Lake Champlain toward the enemy. Unable to sail over the rapids on the Richelieu River, the British actually deconstructed 2 entire schooners, hauled them around the rapids, and rebuilt them for service in Lake Champlain. In addition, they constructed a series of gunboats, some built from frames brought disassembled from England, and began construction of a massive, fully rigged warship. Through it all, Continental and British soldiers alike endured the climate. Harsh rainstorms didn't spare men sheltering in thin tents, regardless of their allegiance. When it wasn't raining, temperatures soared, forcing soldiers to work through humid, sticky heat, plagued by mosquitoes, a particular annoyance for the British and German soldiers. Scouts from both armies sought information about enemy activities. The British attempted to lure boats into shore before opening fire, or ambushing woodcutting parties that strayed beyond the safety of the ship's guns. Continental scouts ranged into Canada. On one patrol in late July, Lieutenant Benjamin Whitcomb lay in wait along the road to Saint-Jean and fired at British Brigadier General Patrick Gordon, who died shortly afterwards. Around this time, the Americans had sent a flag of truce to the British to discuss the treatment of prisoners. But given the recent assassination of a British general, this emissary was treated coldly. He returned to Ticonderoga empty-handed, except for a stern warning from General Carleton that future overtures from rebels would not be accepted unless seeking the king's mercy. The killing of Gordon, Carleton's firm response, and news of the American Declaration of Independence had all hardened the lines of the campaign and raised its stakes that summer. Meanwhile, a substantial British force had sailed into New York Harbor. By September, General William Howe had driven Washington's troops from Long Island and nearly cut them off on Manhattan. News of this slowly and often inaccurately filtered into the Northern Army, which did not yet know that Washington had, in fact, lost New York. In late September, the 80-foot-long, 22-gun British warship Inflexible was launched, the centerpiece of a fleet of 25 vessels assembled in just 3 months. Waiting for them were the 16 ships of Benedict Arnold's American fleet, cruising on the northern stretches of the lake, with Gates's 13,000 soldiers dug in across Ticonderoga and Mount Independence behind them. By early October, the fate of North America hung in the balance, and the stakes could not have been higher. Although they did not yet know that New York had fallen, General Horatio Gates's Northern Army was all that stood between two major British forces. A successful strike against Ticonderoga could end the Revolution before the United States was even a year old. And as the air began to grow chill, soldiers on both sides steeled themselves for the inevitable encounter.